Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got to all of the games that I just didn't have a chance to get to throughout this week. Definitely a couple more that I want to get to tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But, oh, excuse me, I apologize. Let's get to my hot takes for this upcoming weekend, and I think it's going to be a weird weekend. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I think it's one of those weekends where it kind of sneaks up on you, and then you get hit in the face, and a lot of things happen very quickly. And I think Kevin Jennings is going to be one of those things. He's one of those players that came into this season as in a little bit of a battle, and they've tried to figure out just how to handle all this. That BYU game was very, very weird. They didn't necessarily have a rhythm on offense and really didn't have a rhythm offensively for the first couple of weeks. And then Kevin Jennings really took this job, and things really started clicking. SMU has scored 66 points and 42 points in their last two games. Kevin Jennings is 14 for 19, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns against TCU, 16 for 23, 254 yards, 3 touchdowns against who'd they play last week? I can't remember who they played last week. But at the end of the day, he played a big-time game. Florida State is who they played. But he was really, really good in both those games, and I think he's just ramping up. I think he's just finding himself a little bit more in this offense, and I think even against a Louisville defensive line that is going to be a problem, even against a Louisville defense in general that is very, very solid, I think this offense has really found something, and I think they have a number of ways to attack you. I think they have so many different weapons that it's going to be really hard to handle. And then Kevin Jennings can break a 50-yard run. He's so dangerous on the offensive side of the ball, and I think this is a huge moment for this SMU team. This is a huge moment for them to possibly turn a little bit of a corner, make them feel a little bit better about where they sit in the ACC. And although you have that loss to BYU that obviously looks a little bit better right about now, but it's one of those games that if you win this one, you're probably the number 3 team in the ACC going forward. If you lose it, then you're probably asking a lot of questions about where you fit into the ACC going forward. So I think Kevin Jennings just kind of takes over this game. I think when we talk about this week, I think he's going to be one of the first thing that comes out of your mouth because I think he's going to have a crazy day. I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive because of how good I think Louisville's defense is, but I just think there's an opening here that SMU is going to be able to exploit, and Kevin Jennings is going to be at the very center of that. And then you got Ole Miss. I just think their CFP hopes become razor thin this upcoming weekend, and frankly, I don't think it even has to be because they lose. I am picking them to lose this upcoming weekend, but I don't even think it has to be them losing. I think when you look at that game going to South Carolina, they have to be able to prove that they're a different team than they were a week ago. They have to be able to prove that they can walk out there and be physically imposing, be the team that can win running the ball, can win being physical and at the point of attack and just bullying you out of the building. They weren't able to do that last week, and this is going to be another test of physicality that they're going to have to be able to deal with, and we'll see what they can do in this game. But at the end of the day, I think this is one of those games where you see a team schedule a bunch of, let's just be totally honest, cupcakes to start the season, and then you get into conference play and you play really physical opponents, especially in the SEC, and things get really tough. And frankly, I think we're going to see a lot of this over the next couple of years. We're seeing a couple of different examples this year, even with Miami, even last week. Or Miami's a little bit different of example because they did play Florida. They did play a couple of teams, but I think there's a number of teams that have played a little bit of easy opponent. Maybe it happens to Ohio State this upcoming weekend against Iowa. Maybe there was just not enough games to really get this team going, especially from a physical perspective. And I think there's a number of things that South Carolina could do that, at least offensively, could be tougher to deal with than what Kentucky gave them. Maybe defensively they're a little bit easier to deal with, but that pass rush can cause all types of problems. And I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that I'd love to be wrong, frankly, if I'm being totally honest with you. I love the composition of this team. I think they're so much fun to watch. I think Jackson Dart leading the way with Trey Harris catching balls and all of these guys that are going to be absolute problems for this team. It's so much fun to watch them. At the end of the day, I don't know if they have the O-line or the intangibles to really win this game. I don't think they have the ability to really keep up in the SEC race, and it's one of those seasons that you're going to look back on, I think, as an Ole Miss fan and just be really disappointed about where you landed. I think a couple of our really fun, surprise, undefeated teams are going to go down this weekend. And I hate to say it, but I think there's a number of different places where there's just real pitfalls for these teams this upcoming weekend. And I'll start with Rutgers. They head over to Lincoln to play Nebraska, and it's not going to be easy by any means. They barely got a win over Washington last week and kind of let them back into that game. And then Nebraska, obviously coming off that loss to Illinois, they badly want to win this game. They badly want to get back on the right track and kind of get this season at least where they want it to be going forward. It's going to be a tough game for Rutgers, and frankly, I don't think they come out on the right side of it. Then you got Duke, and I think there's one that, frankly, I think we all understand. I think we all understand that the teams that they've played early on in the season are not necessarily to the caliber of what they're going to play, and it's probably going to come to a screeching halt at some point. That being said, they were able to come back against a UNC team that isn't great, but having a 20-point lead should do you enough to beat this Duke team. It wasn't for that UNC team. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it's one of those things that the Georgia Tech offense is just going to be too much for this defense, at least if I had to imagine. Maybe Duke answers the bell and plays really, really good football. I just think it's going to be really tough to down in Atlanta this upcoming weekend. Another one to watch is obviously Pitt heading to Chapel Hill. I think this one's a little bit less sketchy than the other ones, but at the end of the day, UNC's angry. They have a lot to play for. They have their coach to play for right about now, and we'll see if they can possibly handle it. Maybe Omarion Hampton goes for 250 yards, totally takes over this game. And then you got a couple others. I think UNLV inviting Syracuse to town is going to be a really interesting one. They should be able to handle it. If I had to imagine, I think they're going to win that game. I picked them to win that game. But then you got Indiana heading to Northwestern. You got the Service Academy playing some big-time games against Air Force and Tulsa, respectively, Navy and Army. But it's going to be really, really interesting to watch these ones unfold. I just think we lose a couple of these really fun stories that we've had early on in the season. Hopefully we don't. Hopefully they run the table again and we get a little bit more interesting going forward. But as of right now, I don't necessarily love where they're at. Missouri season, I think, turns from a CFP berth to a 9-3 season this upcoming weekend. I think this Missouri team has just kept me on edge the entire season. There's not a game that I've been able to watch for this Missouri team that I've said, okay, that's what I expected. That's what I thought this team was going to be. They're explosive offensively, they're playing opportunistic defense, and they're getting down the field and playing and scoring a ton of points. That's what I expected to see. I've yet to see that from this team. They were able to beat Boston College. They were able to beat Vandy. There were a couple of different things that if they didn't happen in that game, they're coming out on the wrong side and things get really, really bad for this team. I think Missouri has as favorable, probably the most favorable schedule in the entire SEC. I think Texas is probably right up there with them, frankly. But I think when you talk about the CFP, it's absolutely a possibility. But the reality is this team could probably go 10-2 and still miss out, especially if you have Tennessee, Ole Miss, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, all up there at the top. It's going to be really hard for Missouri to be able to pick themselves out of the group. So I think this weekend, they have not necessarily gotten off the ground offensively. A&M is not necessarily the place to do that. Going to A&M to play this defense is not necessarily a place to get right, if you will. So they're going to have to be able to really get something going early on in this game, especially running the ball. And if they can't, maybe it's just one of those days that Missouri just gets absolutely railroaded and we have a ton of questions afterwards. And I think they're very capable. I don't necessarily want to bury this Missouri team by any means. They're very capable of walking into pretty much every stadium in the entire country and getting a double-digit win, including Kyle Field on Saturday. The thing is, I just don't have this team where they need to be right now. I just don't have this team really power rated all that high. I did have them at number 10 in the country. I didn't feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you. I just don't feel at all great about any of the other teams. So I think this team can turn a corner this upcoming weekend. I just think it's going to be a really hard team to turn a corner on. So it's going to be really fun to watch this one unfold. I think Missouri kind of takes a little bit of a step back and realizes that a lot of these, skirting the line in some of these games against Boston College, against Vandy, was going to come back and bite them, and I think it will this upcoming weekend. Another team that's has a ton of hopes for this SEC season is Tennessee, and I think they show a little bit of more mortality this upcoming weekend. I think they're one of those teams that's been rolling along, not really showing any signs of weaknesses, and there's going to be one week where they do. That's just bound to happen in the world of college football. There's bound to be one game where things go a little bit sideways. And when you go to Fayetteville, things can get a little bit sideways in a hurry, to be totally honest with you. And I think Michael Hawkins is kind of a good example of what I'm saying here. When he came into that game, things got a little bit harder for that Tennessee defense. Now, I do think they were playing him a little bit differently than they were in the first half, obviously. But at the end of the day, I do think it's one of those things that when you're playing a Tennessee defense that has such a good defensive line, that has really athletic linebackers, getting an advantage in a numbers advantage in that box is hugely important. Taylor Green's going to give it to you. Michael Hawkins gave it to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and we'll see what happens going forward. But at the end of the day, I think Taylor Green's going to be able to cause just enough problems for this team. I don't necessarily think that Arkansas is going to be able to run for 250 yards and do anything crazy in this one, but I think when you look at up in maybe the third quarter, they're only up 3 points, and they're having a really hard time containing Taylor Green, and you have some questions about this team. Now, I do think Tennessee is going to be able to win this one. I'm not necessarily worried about them not being able to win because at the end of the day, I think they're just comfortably a better team than what Arkansas is right now. But at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit of an opening to where maybe we look up in the second quarter, or maybe we're talking about this game on Monday and we're saying maybe Tennessee isn't quite the team that we thought they were. They're still very fantastic and absolutely can make a CFP run. Maybe they're just not totally infallible, and definitely one of those things that we'll find out this upcoming weekend. And I think Arkansas is going to push their buttons just enough in this one. The last take I have is I think Miami's going to be trailing at halftime in the Cal game. And this is one that, frankly, it's a lot of extenuating circumstances that have very little to do with the talent level of this team. I think this team is going to be incredible. I think they're going to be more than fine down the road of this season. I think traveling across the country is going to be incredibly tough. I think especially after that just happened, it's going to be really tough to just fully get your focus back. Now, I do think their mentality is going to be fine. I think when you have someone like Cam Ward on that football field, you're going to feel confidence. You're going to have a little bit of leadership about you, and you're probably going to be able to get through this moment. I just think there's going to be a moment where we look up at halftime and say, man, that travel really got to him, or man, that defense just didn't quite make the couple of plays they needed to early on in this game, or maybe Cal's just running the ball really effectively early on, and then it gets a little bit more drawn out. But I do think Miami will be fine. I think they more than take care of business here. I have them winning by 16 points. But at the end of the day, I just think that halftime score is going to be a little bit, be one at least that catches your attention. I think you're going to look up and say, maybe Cal can push this team, and then Miami takes over in the second half. I just think it's one of those things that you're traveling such a far way. You're playing a team that is plenty capable of running the ball very effectively, and it's one of those things that I think they'll be fine, but it might just take a second for this Miami team to get fully going. Won't necessarily change the way I feel about this team, but at the end of the day, one of those things that traveling across the country is a very new concept in college football, at least for a conference game, and maybe it gets Miami the most this upcoming weekend. But it's a crazy weekend coming up, and we will cover a little bit more of it on tomorrow's show, but it's going to be crazy. I can almost promise you that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So playoff baseball, have you covered. NFL going underway, have you totally covered. Obviously basketball, getting close to coming up, absolutely have you covered. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.